So let's talk about thermoregulation. This is what the syllabus says. It needs us to talk about specific mechanisms that are used by endotherms. So we're going to talk about each of these structural, behavioural and physiological mechanisms. And then we're going to talk about thermoregulation in humans using a negative feedback loop. All right, let's get started. So firstly, I mentioned endotherms. So let's differentiate ectotherms and endotherms. Ectotherms are classically what we would call cold-blooded. They gain their body heat directly from the environment. So they don't actually use food, they don't burn food to produce heat like endotherms do. So endotherms are your warm-blooded organisms, birds and mammals. So they generate heat through metabolic processes to maintain a constant body temperature. As you know, humans have a body temperature around about 37 degrees, much hotter than the environment generally, and we're able to do that by using much of the food that we eat to, burn it through cellular respiration, and one of the byproducts of that is heat. So we're only talking about endotherms. The syllabus only requires us to talk about endotherms now. So warm-blooded organisms, endotherms. Why is it important to regulate temperature? Thermoregulation is that process of maintaining a constant internal body temperature. We're talking about our endothermic organisms like humans. Why is it important? Because our enzymes have an optimal temperature in which they work. This is not a human, maybe it is, but around about 37 is going to be the optimal for humans. If the temperature is lower than that, the particles, thinking about particle model, particles aren't moving quickly enough for collisions to occur, rapidly enough for chemical reactions to occur. And when the temperature gets higher than the optimum temperature, we have a large, rapid drop in the enzyme activity because the protein structure of the enzyme gets denatured and permanently and irreversibly damaged, just like boiling an egg. So that's why it's important to maintain a constant temperature. So different organisms have a range of different adaptations to be able to maintain a constant body temperature in different environments. So let's have a look. So firstly, we'll talk about structural features. And one is called brown adipose tissue. Now, not all mammals have this, but some do that live in cold environments. Often it is just behind their shoulder blades. And so adipose means fat. So it's a type of fat tissue, brown adipose tissue. It's got a large number of mitochondria, but these mitochondria are specialized such that they're not actually converting glucose into ATP. They're burning that glucose to produce heat. So much more heat and much less ATP. And so this is an infrared image of a mouse or something, and you can see that it's particularly hot here where the brown adipose tissue is. So that's one adaptation that's specifically discussed in the syllabus as a structural feature. I would argue that this isn't just structural, it's obviously got to be physiological as well because it's related to the mitochondria and metabolism. But we're going to see that across all of these. So, they've had to decide to put it somewhere and they've called this a structural feature. Also, insulation is important for reducing heat loss, and different types of organisms use different strategies for this. For example, a fat layer. Fat is a really great insulator, but so is fur and wool, and so are feathers. They're really good at insulation, and insulation reduces heat loss. In terms of behavioural responses, first one we have is kleptothermy. Now, klepto, like if you think about, you might have heard the term kleptomaniac is somebody who can't stop stealing. So klepto means stealing. So in this case, we're talking about stealing heat. So it's where animals share or steal body heat. You can see an example here. This is kleptothermy, where these penguins, they're endothermic, of course, and they're huddling together to steal body heat. Hibernation is a state of minimal activity and metabolic depression that goes on for weeks or months. Now, whilst they say this is behavioural, there's no way that I would be able to sleep for weeks and months. So there must be some physiological processes here as well. But it's this process of reducing activity and metabolic depression in weeks or months when there's minimal food, and when it's really cold. So big bears and things might hibernate for the winter in a cave, stealing body heat from each other. We also have short-term hibernation, and we just call that torpor. So torpor is a reduction in activity and metabolism for short periods of time. It could be like a daily thing, so like maybe overnight there's a reduction in activity and metabolism. And when that happens in the hot conditions, hot and dry conditions, it's called estivation. So it's a state of dormancy in extreme heat and dry conditions. Like, for example, this animal here, it's burrowed and it has gone into a dormant state. So these words are specifically in the syllabus, so you need to know those specific definitions. In terms of physiological mechanisms, I've got some images for some of these. Evaporative heat loss, that's classically the process of sweat evaporating off the skin. And when it does that, because water has a high heat capacity, high specific heat capacity. In other words, it takes a lot of energy to change liquid water into gas. And so that energy, that heat energy, comes from the body. So when the water evaporates from being liquid water to gas, it takes a lot of heat with it. So it's a really effective way of cooling down. Coupling with that, let's skip this next one for a moment. Vasomotor control, skin capillary, vasodilation, and vasoconstriction. So we're talking about the capillaries in the skin. Vasodilation, vaso means vessel, dilate means open. So with skin capillary vasodilation is when the skin capillaries open up, allowing blood to go very close to the surface of the skin, taking a lot of heat from deep within the organism out to the skin. And that way, that heat can radiate off the skin, but also it can be taken away from the skin with evaporative heat loss. So that is what happens when the body is hot, and that's why we get a red face when we're hot. Whereas the alternative here is vasoconstriction. This is closing those blood vessels next to the skin to prevent the heat loss. So I've got an image here. So in warm conditions, we have skin capillary vasodilation, and the blood is able to go close to the skin. And it radiates off, the heat radiates off, and also through evaporative cooling. Whereas in cold conditions, we have skin capillary vasoconstriction, and the blood is kept close to, close to the center of the body and not the skin. And let's move back to this second one, thermogenesis. So thermo, heat, genesis, generating, so making heat. These processes are involved in generating extra heat using metabolic processes. So one is shivering. So it's involuntary contraction of our voluntary muscles. So our big muscles of our body, they uncontrollably shake. That uses muscles to make that occur, muscle contraction. And the byproduct of muscle contraction is the production of heat. And the other one, though, is increased metabolic activity. So a hormone called thyroxine from the thyroid, it activates the mitochondria to do more cellular respiration and therefore producing more heat as a byproduct. And that is the exact reason why you're more hungry on a cold day, because thyroxine is stimulating your mitochondria to burn more food to make heat. Other physiological mechanisms, Not very effective in humans, but other mammals it works very well. That's goosebumps. Another name is piloerection, and that means that the hairs on the skin come up in this erect type position here, and what that does is it reduces airflow onto the skin, which could take heat away. So it creates motionless hair next to the skin. Okay, so our syllabus objectives were to look at the structural, behavioural and physiological mechanisms, and as you can see, these specific terms that were discussed are the ones that we've talked about. Now the next one is to talk about feedback loops in thermoregulation control in humans. So let's go through that again. So humans have a set point of 37 degrees Celsius is the set point for the temperature. That is measured by the hypothalamus in the brain. If the body temperature increases above that, then the body's going to respond in several ways. First of all, there's going to be perspiration or sweat, and that, through the process of evaporative cooling, takes heat away from the body. We have skin capillary vasodilation, so in other words, the red face. Those skin capillaries open up, bringing more blood to the surface of the skin, and heat then moves away from the body through radiation and then also through the evaporative cooling. We also have reduced metabolism, so reduction in the amount of food that's burnt by the mitochondria in cellular respiration to produce heat. That's why you're not as hungry on a warm day. As well as that, there might be behavioural adaptations as well, like finding shelter, finding shade, staying inside, less clothes, drinking more water, etc. as well. And with that, we have a reduction in body temperature back to the set point. Now, in conditions where body temperature decreases, we need to bring that body temperature back up again. So the response by the body is to have goosebumps or a piloerection. Again, not particularly helpful in humans, but the idea with that is to create calm, motionless air next to the skin. We have shivering, which is a process of thermogenesis by making the large voluntary muscles of the body shake uncontrollably. So we're using the muscle contraction to generate heat. Vasoconstriction of the skin capillaries closes off those vessels so under the skin, so keeping the heat close to the body. And thermogenesis through increased metabolic rate, increasing metabolism to so that thyroxine hormone is stimulating the mitochondria to burn more food for producing more heat. And by doing those things, it brings the body temperature back to that set point. So that covers off on explaining thermoregulation in humans, including the role of sweat, shivering, vasodilation, vasoconstriction, using feedback control diagrams.